And what we're trying to do is like, this is the vehicle to get us to morality. This is militia grand jury, the structure of the Constitution. These are the things that put us in a place where we can worship God in our own way without anybody trying to put us in the guillotine.
O Lord our God, we thank you for this day. Once again, God, you've awarded us each this day. We thank you for your sovereignty over all things. And Lord, we thank you for this republic that you have given us. God, we need to be so thankful for it all the time. And especially, Lord, now that you are waking so many of us up and opening our eyes to the truth and teaching us how to keep it. Lord, as we have this continuing discussion today of the other tool, well-regulated militia, we just ask for your wisdom, your understanding, your enabling. And we give you the glory for it now in Jesus' name. Amen. 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 Excuse me. Brad Boardman here again with the Sovereign Solution Show. It's good to have you with us. This may be your first time. Maybe you've been following us for a little bit. And either way, we appreciate you taking the time to come and see what we're about. This particular episode is a continuation of the series that we've embarked on here some time ago. I believe this is part 5 of where we are discussing one of the pillars of the tactical civics mission. Our 4 pillars are, just in case you had never heard, pillar number 1 is we magnify the Lord Jesus Christ. Pillar number 2 is the Constitution of the United States. And the other two pillars are grand jury and well-regulated militia, the two tools that the founders of our republic gave us. They crafted them into our Constitution in order to give we the people the capacity to enforce it. And as always in this series, I've welcoming once again my friend from Colorado, Kevin Ennett. Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good, Brad. How about yourself?
Hey, we're doing well. You know, we're what do they say? We're above ground,
Not
and
promised tomorrow, yeah, but we
and
got it.
none of us are promised tomorrow. That's true, but the Lord's given us today, so let's do what we can do for Him with it. And Kevin, as I say, I think this is number 5 of our series here, and we've really, we have definitely taken our time to kind of lay some foundation for folks that are just, well, so many of us are absolutely unfamiliar with this topic of well-regulated militia, even though it is in our Constitution in a major way. And so we're certainly, this is one of the things that we teach very specifically on here in Tactical Civics. So we've laid some foundation. We've looked at the history. We've talked about the fact that it's an ancient institution, as is grand jury. Both grand jury and well-regulated militia predate the Constitution of the United States by hundreds of years, and both of them were fully operational and very well known at the founding of our republic. And then we've talked about, well, okay, who killed America's militias and what happened to them? Because what we see today, or whatever we hear about militia today, as you've so well described, when people, across this republic hear the word militia, you have this shrinking back, and that's terrible, and it's really because we've been lied to by the media and by the politicians and the criminal servants, all of that. And it's been by design, because our militias were systematically disenabled. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Disabled, and really swept aside and forgotten about, in favor of this thing that we want to talk about a little bit today, essentially our whole military system. And so I was thinking, Kevin, maybe to get started today, we're going to ask the question, well, is the military, this thing that we know of today, we got the Navy, the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the National Guard, all of that, is that in the Constitution? And, I love the fact that you are working this thing with me because of your career in the Marines. So why don't you kind of kick us off a little bit, with and launch us into this topic?
Okay. Well, I guess it's pertinent to kind of give a little bit of a resume. I spent 22 years in the Marine Corps. I started in the enlisted ranks, and I spent 16 years there. I got to the point where I was selected to Master Sergeant, or E8. And at the time, I had submitted for the Chief Warrant Officer program, and I got selected. So instead of pinning on E8, I pinned on W1. I became a Warrant Officer. And then after 6 more years, I ended up retiring as a Chief Warrant Officer 3. Now, throughout those 22 years, or for the first 16 years, the reason why I kind of segregated it like that is because you change whenever you become a warrant officer or an officer, and you basically come into commission. It's W-2 whenever you become a commissioned officer in the Marine Corps, but ultimately for those first 16 years, including the initial one, whenever I went to my MEP station and I raised my right hand and I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, I did that every single time that I would re-enlist. And then whenever I became a warrant officer, now I was in charge of administering that oath. And honestly, it wasn't until I got out and I was very, very bitter. I think because I was forced retired because of the COVID shot. I had a contraindication that would have left me blind or dead, and the Marine Corps didn't seem to care because it was a political decision. I took it personally, and for years it took me a lot longer to warm back up to the military, to the Marine Corps, than I would have liked. But it was ultimately, I read the book. Jamie Walden is my pastor. He wrote a book called Omega Dynamics. And in that, he illuminated all of the godly Christian structures that were the fundamental ethos within the military writ large, but specifically in our experience as Marines. And it wasn't until then where I warmed back up to it, but I still had that nagging aspect of something was wrong, because obviously the output didn't equal the input. You go in with honorable intentions, but you exit to see dishonorable effects. And it was me really realizing, like, I had sworn that oath, I had administered that oath, and I had never taken a moment to consider what I was even saying. I didn't think about the Constitution. I didn't understand that enforcing it was something that I was not doing. And by the structures, and it's I guess it's kind of, I tend to get complex in how I describe things, so I apologize up front. But ultimately, like, that godly structure that Jamie explained in his book, I realized it after a career of being a secular Marine, because it wasn't until 2021 until I came back to the Lord. But it wasn't until then that I realized, holy cow, that this is actually something that honored God throughout. But how did the effect become so evil? So that was one of my points of analysis, and I figured it out. Like, it was the national security strategy comes down to the national defense strategy, and then the Joint Chiefs Staff applies it to their individual force components, which goes into mission essential tasks and training and readiness. But it's a trickle-down effect where the input gets dropped in the top, it trickles through all those channels, and then us as lower enlisted and officers run around and do the bidding, thinking that we're doing good, the greater good, but the effect is the effect of whoever dropped in the input. We're just fulfilling. We don't exactly know what we're fulfilling. So, like, I've been able to reconcile this. But in that, one of the structures that I analyzed was, if I'm supporting and defending the Constitution, then maybe I should read it. I went back and I read it, and then I realized that there's a question that a lot of people ask whenever you start having these conversations is, well, we've looked at the Constitution, is the military constitutional? Yep. And the true answer to that is, it depends. Of course. It's a yes and no.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a great ramp up, I think, to what we want to discuss here today. And again, we're, as we've said a number of times through this series, we're kind of freewheeling in terms of how far we get. We're not trying to necessarily cram a certain amount into an episode, because we really want, you and I want to understand all of this as well as we can. And it's, we're early in the game on that. But we want our listeners to be able to comprehend what we're saying. And so we're not rushing through this, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, but this question that we want to start out with today, as you and I have both said, is the military constitutional. And, in our notes here, I notice you say yes and no. So obviously there's a couple different directions you could go there, but why don't we, really probably the best place to start if we want to know if anything is constitutional is the Constitution itself. And so, why don't you go ahead and, I know that we're specifically going to aim here, as we so often do here in Tactical Civics, at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States. So I'll hand it to you, brother.
Thank you. So Article 1, Section 8 is really the job description, the limitations that we put on Congress. There were 17 enumerated items within there, and enumerated means nothing beyond this. Everything beyond this, Article 10 tells us that that's our job as we the people. We do it, you don't. Mm-hmm. Now, it's obviously grown completely beyond that, and I think we've talked about that ad nauseum in other episodes. But the best way to analyze, like, what is it that the military should have been? Is the military constitutional? We learn that answer by analyzing the actual articles that apply, or the clauses within Article 8, Article 1, Section 8 that pertain to that. And I kind of identified those, and it's not limited, because this is an exploration of everybody to get into the thing and figure out what it truly says. So get in there and read it all and understand what applies and what doesn't apply.
Yeah. So right before you start that, let me also just we talked about the word enumerated. Article 1, Section 8 gives us the enumerated powers that we, the people, have delegated to our government. Okay.
Right.
Another, I think a really good companion word to enumerate, and this has to do, we teach this pretty intensely in tactical civics, is the word stipulated.
There you go.
Stipulated. In other words, I think that is such a great word. I remember using some other word, early on in my tactical civics days, and I can remember David Zuna coming back and saying, "Okay, let me just correct you right there. Let's use the word stipulated." It's one of those words where there's no wiggle room.
Yes.
We, the people, in the Constitution, stipulated this is the way it's going to be. Not that way, not that way, this way, Congress, this way, executive branch, this way, judicial branch. We stipulate it. Okay, there you go.
Well, we stipulated, and the pertinent clauses are 1, 10, 11, but specifically 12 through 16. And I was going to have you and I kind of go through, and we'll do this analysis, so that way we're not hiding anything.
Right.
It's not just going to be Kevin's opinion or Brad's opinion. This is what it says.
Yeah.
Would you mind reading Clause 1 right there?
You betcha. Okay. Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 8, Clause 1 says, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States.
Yep. So the federal is in charge of that, and it's often taken out of context. This one, they use that general welfare clause to kind of justify a lot of things, but ultimately they are only able to justify it because we don't enforce it. But We'll get to that. Now. But within that, it says provide for the common defense. So obviously they have the charter to do what we're talking about, what our analysis is focusing on here, which is to create armies. To follow that, Clause 10 says to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. Now, I've got a definition of law of nations if anybody really wants it, but that'll be in the show notes afterwards for people to retrieve. Ultimately, there is international law. Once you get 200 miles offshore, you're within international waters, and I could be wrong on that mileage, but ultimately a certain distance off our shores becomes international waters, and there's a different set of laws that apply while you're out there.
Yeah.
So they have to be able to work symbiotically with those laws to balance between the laws on our shores and protecting our citizens when they're abroad, and then also protecting our interests at home. So that's another thing that kind of gives them the Duraloth to ensure that whatever they create as a force that goes beyond into international waters is empowered with these elements, right? And they'll talk about that later, but the next one we'll come to is Clause 11.
So Clause 11 says to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water.
You heard that, though, declare war. Like, I don't understand. Why is it the executive branch has been declaring war as long as I've been alive?
Yeah. This all has to do with Congress.
I know.
To declare war.
It's almost like that's not lawful.
Yeah.
But no, and that again, like they figure out what's concerning captures on land and water. they issue marques and reprisals, which are essentially outward-facing cease and desist letters, and they determine what needs to be the empowerment of whatever force, naval, land, or however, that can enforce those things on the high seas to protect our shores. But to protect our shores, to provide for common defense, not offense, is the charter that all those things filter through.
Yeah.
So we get to the money one right here.
Yeah. So this this next one, we're gonna go nice and slow through this because again, what we're doing here is we're seeing, okay, what does the Constitution actually say, and then of course what we want everybody to do, ourselves included, is to take that which is the standard. Okay, this is the way things ought to be, and then take a look at what the way things are today in our country. So go ahead, give us clause 12, Kevin.
To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years.
How many?
2 years. Like I think we're at 200. No, we're at 160 years.
You mean there's a limit on how long you can have an army up and operational? Interesting.
Unfortunately, like administrative sand, I think, is the term that John Lazork had coined, that it caught on with me for some reason. But like they throw administrative sand at the Constitution by keeping it alive, and they do throw through the National Defense Authorization Act, which you'll see like is the budget. It's all the justifications for keeping the military machine, the industrial complex, alive. I really like that they've renamed it the War Department, but I think that's just them taking off the I don't know, like the veil, so to speak.
Yeah,
it's always really been that.
It's just a first pass at maybe making things
and in here,
mean what they say, what they mean, and mean what they say. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think a pertinent segue or aside right here is that I went through and I kind of did an AI study before we had this conversation, and we've had 94 different interactions, military engagements abroad since, and then we've talked about how the militia was diminished and then completely administratively like almost destroyed. It's funny how all these interventions of our military on foreign soil happened right around the time that the militia was being disabled. But it's been 94, and I say 94 with tongue in cheek because some other elements, let me take a look real quick. They had multiple engagements within, like Cuba. We were there from 1898 to 1902, 1906 to 1909, 1912, 1917 to 1922. So that's 5 more right there. We can add 4 to 94. That's 98. We go down just a little bit in Honduras, 1903, 1907, 1911, 1912, 1919, 1924 to 1925. Repeated interventions to protect U.S. interests and restore order to U.S. interests, whatever those are.
Yeah. See, now there's a word that we need to get over. You know, this whole the U.S. interests. You know, how does that mesh with the word defense?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you look at, I think it's 97% of the United States existence since inception we've spent in a time of peace, quote unquote. I think there's been 17 years since our founding that we experienced peace, and most of those was before the Civil War or the war to enslave the states.
Right.
And so that combines with this, because the National Defense Authorization Act doesn't really work unless there is a necessity for that 2-year appropriation to be kicked down the road like the proverbial can. So it's an administrative, let's call it the silver tongue, right?
Deception. Yeah.
Exactly. So like, no, just no.
Yeah.
It's so far gone. You just have to like stop. We're dividing by 0. We need to start this up.
And I think it merits us, saying this in a number of different ways here while we're on clause number 12, because, it's been my observation that virtually no one, if you wanted to talk percentage of our American citizenry, virtually no one has ever thought about the fact that, oh, this standing army that we've had for however long is not in the Constitution. And it's not that you can't have an army, but it's supposed to be for a very specific defense related purpose. And that 2 years, I mean, we did stipulate 2 years. and we're a long way down the road past 2 years with our standing army. So it's really, and we're not claiming to be the end all here as far as all the answers. But again, the point I made at the beginning is all of us, all of us can read English, and there's no reason why we can't read this Constitution and see what it actually says, and then wonder how in the world we have been manipulated and twisted and ratcheted, to where we are today. So
diseducated.
Yeah.
I mean, it is designed it was written by the common man for its managing assets, right? And it was designed in such a way that we understood. And I would say that we were much smarter 200 years ago whenever.
Yeah. We hadn't been dumbed down yet.
Nope. I've got a whole series on that from 1825 to 2025, 200 years of compulsory schooling, 100% effectiveness rate.
Yeah.
Creating now exactly what it set out to create. And then we move into clause 13. It talks about providing and maintaining a navy. So now we are starting to understand that there are military forces that are supposed to be stood up at all given times. But again, it goes back to that first clause. Through that filter, it is for the common defense. So it has a very finite rule. So, and that, let's go ahead and justify the Coast Guard, because the first thing in time of war that the Coast Guard does is it becomes a part of the Navy. Even though in peacetime it's a part of the Department of Homeland Defense, but Department of Homeland Defense by any concept of the imagination is completely unlawful, completely illegal, completely not a thing.
Right.
According to the Constitution.
Yeah.
So Coast Guard and Navy, one between the two and honestly, I love my Navy brethren, but if I had to choose between the two, it would be the Coast Guard and Heartbeat. Those guys are spitfire. Those guys are intense.
Yeah.
And they do their job every day. Whereas like me in the Marine Corps, I practiced doing my job in hopes that I'd be able to do it for 6 months at a time here and there. These guys join the Coast Guard knowing what they're getting into, and they do their job from day one to the final day.
Right.
There's something.
And what are they doing? They're guarding the coast.
Exactly.
Every day.
Yep.
And you ponder that a little bit, and you think, wow, what all might have occurred if they had not been doing that every day for so long.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yep. Indeed. You can take clause 14 if you like.
14 says to make rules. Again, this is Congress, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. They're to make rules for the governing the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. So I take that to mean, Kevin, that when they throw in the word land, when there is an army, say we had an army for a specific purpose for 2 years or up to 2 years, Congress is making governing and regulating that army.
Yep.
So,
and it's the same rule set that applies to the Navy during peacetime whenever they're just defending the shores.
yeah.
And that comes in the form of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Now, in the military, they like to joke with you all the time, like, this is not a democracy. You gave up all your democratic rights whenever you came in here. And neither is America. So, like, good thing the military is not a democracy, because America's not either. That's a burning ship that's sinking.
Yeah. Let it.
Yeah. But they make that joke because there's an entirely different rule set and I wouldn't call it a higher standard, maybe a stricter standard because of who we are and what we're charged to do.
Mm-hmm.
And these rules have to apply both abroad and domestically. So that Uniform Code of Military Justice does apply those rules so they fulfill clause 15. Good job. Like, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's as we get into clause 15 and 16 here in a minute that we'll understand that rule set is also supposed to be formulated and applied to the militia as well.
Mm-hmm.
But clause 15 is to provide for the calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. So there's their job description right there with 3 finite tasks to perform.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a great statement, you know. And you know, certainly it's a great statement for us as we are trying to recover and restore and you know, bring back well-regulated militia. You know, this is what they're about. This is what, you know, this is really a great description of what militia is. So Congress is supposed to call forth when it's necessary, militia to execute the laws of the Union. You know, and this is, you know, I think maybe that's a pretty good tie-in to why we need militia to back up our grand jury.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in other words, grand jury is going to be about the laws of the Union. That's, you know, that's what they're doing. They're taking a look at the laws, and then they're taking, you know, once they've determined that a law actually is constitutional, not repugnant to the Constitution, then if somebody is transgressing that law, then you know, they're investigating whether or not, you know, what evidence there is. And so militia is there to give them teeth to execute the laws of the Union. So,
yep. And I mean, if we look at each one of those specific descriptors through a lens of mission and capability, then this is where kind of like the rubber meets the road, right? Yep. Because we've created the Air Force and we've created the Space Force. I'm going to say that if you look at the Navy and you look at what the Navy's charter is to defend the shores, you can kind of extrapolate, well, the air is now the shores because there was no air factor other than hot air balloons or not even hot air balloons back in 250 years ago at the inception when they wrote this. Mm-hmm. And then you take that a layer further and you can kind of justify Space Force as well. But I would argue that those functions, and this is one of those things, like you said earlier, like a lot of this stuff is open to interpretation. Obviously, we would have to come to a consensus based on what we would want to allow as peoples right. Dictating the Constitution's boundaries. But at that point, like the Air Force and Space Force, why would that not be a function of the militia? And the militia itself, because if it's to suppress insurrections, repel invasions, it has to repel invasions from land, air, and sea.
Wherever, yeah.
And then if it is going to suppress insurrections and execute the laws of the Union, then they need to be in active capacity in every state, every county, every locality at all given times, almost like a police force, except the key delineator here is that the militia does it without pay.
With volunteer.
Yeah, because whenever pay comes in, it becomes a conflict of interest and you're no longer doing those 3 tasks, you're working for a paycheck. Yeah. So we can take that, and I know that this is the military constitutional just blew up into is anything but the militia constitutional question, really.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, we have those things built into the militia's capability, which begs the question, why did we create all of these extraneous organizations to do the same things that the militia was designed to do? And the answer to that was specifically to usurp it. It doesn't mean that the people that are taking part in it or are less than admirable. I think that I love the police officers. I try to do everything that I can to like help them in their job. Like I look out for them whenever they're pulling on people on the side of the road. I admire what it is that they do, but the function should reside with the militia. Unfortunately, 200 years of schooling has taught otherwise.
Yeah.
So we need to slowly ramp back into it. We don't need to drop a nuke on the existing system,
Right.
metaphorically. We need to understand where it's supposed to be, try to get back to where we were supposed to be, and
Mhm.
make this thing reflect our morality more so than what is on the
Yeah,
horizon.
it seems to me like it really is just a question of getting who's in charge back where it should be. And this question of Air Force, Space Force, these different branches of the military. I think we need to be quick to say that it's not. Obviously technology has expanded, and therefore uh, the potential threats from outside of our republic uh, have increased. So we're not saying, I don't think, that these are necessarily bad ideas,
Yeah.
that we shouldn't have, defense from space. We shouldn't have defense from the air, so on and so forth. But I always remember David early on saying, you know, again, not bad ideas, but in order to make them constitutional, we would need to amend the Constitution.
Hmm.
And that is a capacity that we the people have. Okay,
Yeah.
so if we say that if we want these things to be legitimate and be operating within the bounds of the Constitution, then we need to at some point we're going to, to encompass these and to embrace these in a constitutional way, then we need to have amendments that do that. So,
Yeah. And there's multiple ways to do that, which I think we'll discuss in some of the next questions.
yeah.
But you can be representative, push it, and then there's also avenues for the people to push it, which may not be the best one, but there is a backup.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see we've been holed up there. Well, okay, and I guess we have talked in a little bit about this repelling invasions, suppressing insurrections. That seems to one of the functions of well-regulated militia would be to, when we talk about insurrections, what's a good picture of that these days? Antifa, some of that kind of nonsense.
Antifa, BLM, the southern border over the last few decades.
Hmm.
Yeah, that is insurrections and invasions right there.
Hmm.
You can see them as both. It's when it becomes violent. I
Yeah,
remember they started using the mostly peaceful moniker.
yeah,
And if you really do math the way that the news agencies were doing math, like, oh, there was a 24-hour period, there was only a 30-minute period of violence, so the day was mostly peaceful. Okay, that's great. By that standard, World War II was too.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, well, and so the word suppress, you know, uh, kind of speaks to me of something that's happening within our borders.
yes,
And the word repel seems to speak to something that's trying to happen from without the border,
yeah,
from outside our borders, trying to get in. And so militia is all about uh, both of those functions. Um,
yep,
take care of business inside the borders and repel nonsense that tries to come across our borders. So,
exactly. And I would ask this pseudo philosophical question. Whenever I mentioned earlier, like the 94 interventions in other countries that we've done since the turn of the 19th century, how many things would really be coming to invade us, and how much would, like, we stir the pot, right?
mm-hmm,
There's a lot of people that don't like us because of what we've done to them.
right,
Whenever I was abroad and when I came home, there was a concern that some of the targets that I had taken out would bring reprisal to me, because I mean, all you got to do is find me on Facebook. You can figure me out, right?
right, right.
So how many of those things wouldn't have come home to visit us had we never stirred that pot? It's
Yeah,
philosophical. It's hard to grasp the morality that we would have as a country that would, in effect, if basically permeate the rest of the world
mm-hmm,
had we stuck to our structure and enforced the Constitution from the beginning.
yeah, yeah. Well, whenever we have this, touch on this topic, and of course, full well, uh, Smedley Butler, I mean, War is a Racket is the
Yes.
book he wrote. And it's a great little read. And, you know, uh, when you take that idea and you stack it up against all the different conflicts, like what you were, where you were enumerating, uh,
Mm.
you know, uh, defending our own territory and borders is one thing. But traipsing around in other sovereign nations, pretending like we should be there, that I believe is in large measure where war becomes a racket. It's
Oh,
all
yeah.
about the money.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. Woodrow Wilson's coined the phrase, "We're spreading democracy." So we're creating communism everywhere. And that's honestly, I think everybody that we've invaded is an enemy to the cross now. So whatever we're doing, we're not doing it right.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But the
let's see.
final,
Are we ready to pivot to 16 here?
yes, sir. Clause 16 is to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of officers, the authority of training militia according to the disciplines prescribed by Congress. So it's like a cycle there.
Mm-hmm.
They do create a uniform code of militia justice, if you will, and that is the conduct by which they're going to conduct themselves. And then the state appoints the officers. This is kind of a template of how to become constitutional. And like obviously they didn't get into any more detail beyond that because each state is its own ecosystem and it has its own requirements.
Yep.
What we're going to train for in Louisiana is going to be different than what you train for in Washington.
Yep.
So it was left to the states to embellish, if you will, to operate because the states were above the federal. The federal just said, "Oh, here, Mr. State, here's your little rule book that I hope you enforce with your militias. Oh, sounds great. You guys have got your officers." And then, even then, looking at it from a county level, the county level knows who the pillars of the community are. They know who needs to be in these positions. So they nominate to the state, here is who we want to be the Tarrant County, Texas militia.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like the top, whatever the rank structure would be.
Whatever the description, the title is.
Because they know that he's going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
But I mean, so Congress is within its own right to build an army, but like we said, it has been like meaning has been extrapolated from that.
Mm-hmm.
And they've gone well outside the bounds of what was intended. And it is only because we don't enforce it.
Exactly.
We don't enforce it because we don't have the militia that backs the grand jury being the element that gives us the lawful pushback against unlawful activity.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the jurisdiction thing, which we'll get into later.
Yeah.
But the question is, I guess, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, yes, those are legitimate military entities.
Mm-hmm.
According to the Constitution. Still will require an amendment to justify some of that, right?
Right.
But the Army, every bureau, every department, the Department of Justice writ large, state and federal policy enforcers, like if you look at the letter of the law, no, they're not. That doesn't mean that we're trying to abolish them tomorrow.
Right.
But if we see how inflated our system is and how it's clearly not working for us, I mean, just take a look at it. We can't even investigate an assassination right now.
Right.
And I think that there's contrived meaning behind that. But ultimately, like that just means that there's a foreign government running our country.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? Well, because of all the reasons we just listed.
Yeah. The way I like to say that, just technically speaking, so what you've listed there, the Army, all the bureaus, there's a code word for usurpation. The DOJ, Department of Justice, state and federal policy enforcers, and that list is long. These things technically have never ever had a constitutional basis for existing.
Yes.
So, and again, we the people over these generations, by hook and by crook, we've allowed Congress to get away with, you know, inventing these things and propping them up and funding them and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is they are not in the Constitution, and we the people
Right.
never ever say that again. We the people never
Never.
ever stipulated that Congress could do those things. So, but when they did do those things, we the people, because we have been lulled to sleep, allowed them to do it, and here we are living with all of that nonsense that is repugnant to the Constitution.
But the encouraging factor there is that there are citizens that continue to pressure those hinges. Otherwise, we wouldn't have all the Supreme Court rulings. We went over a bunch of them in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
But mainly to this point right here, Marbury versus Madison shows us that no law that is unconstitutional was ever even a law. It didn't take effect at any point, and you can operate as if it never happened. That will be very difficult with the current police state that we have in place, but we all should be able to analyze the legal system, which resides outside of law, is not designed to be constitutional. So we should be pivoting back to the Constitution.
Yeah. I mean, there, we could certainly take a parenthetical pause here and go through, cite example after example of what that looks like in our society today and in our existence today. We mentioned in one of our, I think it was probably the last episode, the whole idea of licenses. All the different licenses that are required to do this and do that, and required by our government of us, that flat out are repugnant to those laws that say we're going to require these licenses. They're repugnant to the Constitution, and therefore they are no law at all and never existed, and they're void, and we can treat them so. But like you say, we've got the way I like to operate with those as much as I can is, if I realize, okay, that law is repugnant to the Constitution, therefore it's no law at all, therefore I can treat it as if it's no law at all. I like to treat it that way, but I don't go out and advertise that I'm treating it that way. In other words, I say, well, I'm ignoring that, and it's going to be up to them to come and catch up with me if they don't like the fact that I'm ignoring it. But I'm not putting a sign in the back window of my car saying, hey, I'm not complying with thus and such and thus and such. I mean, that I think is, I don't think that's a very good way to operate. We just need to not comply and be quiet about it.
Yep.
So anyway, that was a little aside.
But it ultimately describes what it is we're talking about when we say we're living in a system of organized crime, because it's really mafia law tactics, using law as pseudo law.
Right.
But before we move on to the next question, since I am a Marine and I didn't mention the Marine Corps in there, I have to say that even within the Marine Corps, there's probably two divisions of constitutional and unconstitutional. And if we stay our butts on the ships, we're good.
Yeah. Yeah. But of course, the other alternative is, and aren't those the stories that we hear about? Isn't that the thing that movies are made of, where the Marines are landing on somebody else's shore, to do whatever? And generally speaking, that's probably where they would become unconstitutional.
Yes.
But
the way that we were born was we got the name Leathernecks because of the fact that we were on the decks fighting hand-to-hand combat with any kind of invading force that would try to get onto our vessels.
Yeah.
Where the Navy just piloted the ship and shot the big guns, we would be the ones whenever they got past them to take them out at face, well, eyeball to eyeball.
Yeah. 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 Well, again, this is why I'm so glad I'm doing this with you, Kevin, because you had all kinds of military experience, and I have had zero military experience. But
Those are
I
unqualified.
can read the Constitution.
Boom. That's it. Yep.
Well, let's go ahead. Looks like we're maybe about 15 minutes out here or so from our kind of our 1 hour mark is what we try to shoot for. But where do we go next here?
I think that we can probably push the restoration, the last two questions until next episode, and just kind of cover what. Here's the question: what if we, the people, just started what's been stolen or restarted it?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my immediate thing would be to kind of look back and say, like, we've already shown how it's been stolen from Lincoln's usurpation 160 years ago. The results of that shock and awe, where he disabled the American militia, solidified a standing army, and created a fiat currency system to pay them. And then the subsequent 70 years after that, of administrative changes that further disabled the physical militia. And in 1933, when the lawful entity of militia had all been erased, one of those first things that were created after the Civil War, if you stop and think about it, was the NRA, and after the war to enslave the states. I'm sorry. It was
we understand
yeah,
we're training ourselves. We've
okay.
been trained to call it the Civil War, but we are untraining ourselves in that and retraining to call that war the war to enslave the states.
Yeah. And then peeling back some layers on that, like the NRA itself was created to be a gun lobby. It still operates to the capture of would-be patriots under the guise of the Second Amendment, all but ignoring the first and most critical 13 of those 27 words. And I want to read this real quick so that way they don't. The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, the NRA, litmus test, right? I'm not trying to tear them down. I think that they've got a lot of great people in there, but unfortunately, if they wanted to fix militia, we'd have this problem wrapped up in 2 weeks. And why are they not when they say that they're proponents of the Second Amendment? All they talk about is the last words, but there's 13 words right up front: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The only thing that's necessary in all of the Constitution or any of its amendments is a militia. It's probably one of the most critical elements of it.
Yeah.
And that is what has been stolen.
Yeah. Imagine being, going back 250 years now, roughly, and being involved in penning the 12 amendments that were first proposed after the ratification of the Constitution. So we said, okay, here's the Constitution. Yes, we ratify it. It's our highest human law. But then, of course, there had been some advance agreement that we're gonna ratify, but we're coming right back with some proposed amendments to it that are going to further stipulate that we, the people, have certain rights. Okay. And so, in other words, we're saying it in no uncertain terms. And the Second Amendment, I don't know. Do we know who the individuals were who were primarily in charge of this language? I don't know right off the top of my head. I probably should, but imagine setting that forth, that amendment, a well-regulated militia. In other words, the Constitution has already been ratified, and we've already gone through Article 1, Section 8 to show what they had to say in the body of the Constitution about militia. But then they come back with this amendment, and those first 13 words, which we've talked some about, those first 13 words today are the ones that we should be hammering over and over and over and over again, because we've got the whole arms, keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's what the all the noise is about in our republic when it comes to guns these days. But I'm imagining what these guys were thinking as they're crafting this amendment. We've got to make sure that people know that a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. And then, because of that fact, it just follows that keeping and bearing arms is a necessity. Is also a necessity. Go ahead, Kevin.
The other. Now, I don't have the direct answer on who proposed it, but I'm pretty sure, like David had recommended this series, and this is volume 5 of the Founders. I'm kind of backwards. So
I have it.
There you go. So, and then within it is ad nauseum. It covers just about every and this is just one of 5. This is the smallest book in the series.
I know. It's a huge set. It's a huge set.
It is a huge set, but in it is every argument and mindset from every state representative and every individual that weighed in on the Constitution, and that weighed in on the amendments, the construction thereof. Yeah. Like it's a short read. The Constitution's only 10 articles, but it's or 7 articles, and you look at it and you're like, man, there's quite a bit of intellectual background that goes into every single letter that was put on that page.
Yeah.
And like Leah said, it's what's in the Constitution is in the Constitution. What's not is not.
Yeah.
And those things, that's paraphrased, but ultimately, within this, it takes away all question as to what it was that they meant.
Yeah, what the discussion surrounding, when I'm glad you brought that up, Kevin, because really the crafting of the Constitution, was a lot of things, a lot went into that, but it certainly was an exercise in condensation. We've got to take all of this discussion that we're having here, and we've got to get that down into a few words that make sense and lock things up, So, yeah.
And then you read it, and it seems a little complex for our modern language nowadays. And I've got a theory on this. This is another philosophical thing, but I think we had talked in a previous episode about how the gentleman that went across and the Frenchman that went across the United States and did a study on what made America so great. And he came back with, if you walked into any house, whether it was in the center of the city or the far reaches of the prairies, you'd find 2 works on the mantle. It would be the King James Bible, and it would be the corpus of Shakespeare.
Right.
And if you look, I didn't enjoy learning Shakespeare because of the language. It's hard for most everybody to read the King James Bible because of the language. But if you look at how our language is structured in our fundamental supreme law, it is structured, and those 2 works make you understand and speak that language, so that way you can be prepared for it. So a lot of those things have fallen by the wayside because we pretend that we don't understand it, and all it is just getting back to the fundamentals.
Yeah.
But
a lot of times understanding is actually just being intentional about read it. If you don't understand it, slow down, read it again. Okay, parse it, take it apart, put it back together. You can understand it, but you have to decide to understand it.
Yep. But back on that, what happens if we restart what's stolen? Let's consider what we're looking at right now. And I'll read this from my input because I had this concern. I think a lot of people have this concern, especially, it is the big topic of conversation these days, is we're on the eve of a hyperbolic AI growth. And whenever I say hyperbolic, I mean it tends to infinity in a finite amount of time. Robot technology is already combined with this AI tech and will soon be the new enforcement tool, as this combination of might and knowledge is fundamentally uncontainable. It's been invented, so we can't stop it. And if we don't do it, somebody else will. It's going to happen within human existence.
Mm-hmm.
This is also called a singularity. The current legal system which fundamentally resides outside of law as a pseudo corporate structure, that's going to be what's uploaded to the consciousness of drones and robots and unleashed on the public for effectively erasing all remnants of constitutional protections and the remnant itself, probably. But this will allow evil to abound and technocratic criminals to rule the earth in a whimsical democidal framework. Talk about hyperbolic, but that's you're not even embellishing there. Like that's quite literally what we're on the precipice of. And I talked about another example. I had a conversation with a high school kid not long ago that is one of my friend's neighbors, and I asked him what it is that made America great in the beginning and what makes it great now. And he was like, "Well, I have no idea. I didn't know it was great." I was like, "Okay, well, this is," and I gave him a couple of the details on fundamental civics. And at the end of it, he looked at me. He goes, "I don't think that any of that's true. I think you're just making it up." And I was like, we are truly not even a full generation away from losing everything.
So you combine that.
Yeah, you combine all those things, the part that I just read, and then like the school system's product, and it's like, maybe this tactical civics thing needs to be a little bit more intentional.
Front burner.
Front burner.
Definitely intentional. Yeah, one of the things that stuck out, I'll just, we don't have to get too bogged down in it, but I loved what you read there. The current legal system. In other words, look around, our judges, the laws, the attorneys, all of that falderall, a lot of it is, it's fundamentally resides outside the law.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is a legal fiction.
That's something to consider and something to behold. If you realize that our current legal system, our current way of doing things, and this is why I say, I liken this to Donald Trump. I tell people, hey, he needs to come in here and learn what we're learning because he doesn't know this. Okay. Yeah. And certainly I like the guy. I've always supported him. He's a pragmatist. He wants to get things done. And what he's doing right now is he's working within the current way of doing things. But the current way of doing things isn't in the Constitution. And that's what we're trying to move ourselves back to is let's get back to where we operate, and the things that we are doing and the things we are not doing are what we, the people, stipulated in the Constitution. And that may well, Kevin, be a really good place for us to start to wrap this up here today. I think I think I'm going to probably be going back and listening to this episode myself because we bit off a pretty good chunk here today, but I think it's very practical. It's very we're trying our very best to tell the truth, and I think we've probably given whatever audience we have some things to consider if they haven't. So
I think this is the shortest show notes we've had, but one of the longest topic.
Yeah, and really most important, where we actually go back to what does the actual highest human law say?
Yep.
Let's just all sit down here for a minute and decide to read it, and then let's go to work to understand it and realize that that's what we should be looking at, and then we should be taking this society that we're in and all of the like I say, the nonsense, the falderall that we're living under. Is how does that stack up with the actual law? And so often it does not stack up at all. So
if you don't mind, I'll read the last point to the answer to that question of what if we should restart it.
Go ahead.
If we restart what's been stolen, we return to the framework the founders gifted us, ensuring that the people themselves, which is us and our neighbors, represent our best interests, not some technocrat controlling our morality from a far off land, or the quintessential evil empire dictating how many bugs that we eat, or how much fluoride we drink, or how much carbon tax we're going to have to pay to save the planet. And I reiterated Dr. Edwin Vieira's quote from our introductory episode is, you will have government one way or the other. Either we'll have the system of popular self-government the Constitution set up, or you will have some system of government imposed from the top down.
Yeah.
And that honestly, that's a good segue to the next one, is how do we get there from here? And then we get into the tactical civics, restoring militia county by county, but it's not just militia. But the thing that I kind of wanted to like bring it in and refocus, like clear the air, like I said in the first statement of this when we're talking about the military question, is like, what is what you and I are doing other than a Holy Spirit led study, which, like, I don't know if we're on the mark according to God's overall plan. All I know is that you and I were put here for a reason to do something right now. And what we're trying to do is, like, this is the vehicle to get us to morality. This is militia grand jury, the structure of the Constitution. These are the things that put us in a place where we can worship God in our own way without anybody trying to put us in the guillotine, right? And all we want to do is sit at his feet and be in his presence.
Amen. That's
we don't care, like, this is the way to get there.
Yeah.
I've analyzed so many things since I've been out of the military. I've used all my experience in military strategy, and it always keeps coming back to the tactical civics mission. And it's because they put Christ first.
Amen. Amen. And that is certainly our goal. It's our highest goal, is to be well, we ask him all the time to just help us to understand first ourselves, and then to be able to teach it and convey it to other people's, and it's that's what it's going to take. Well, that's what I believe he requires of us. What it's going to take, and people say, hear me say all the time, like a broken record, what it's going to take is that miracle working God that we read about in the pages of the Bible.
Yes.
Doing those miracles in our republic. That is what it's going to take. This thing is, there's no amount of human effort or education or understanding that is going to bring this republic back to where it needs to be. But certainly we who are his servants, as we offer up our human efforts to him, I believe he'll be faithful to come and do what he does. Go ahead.
So if you're called, all it takes is all you've got.
Yeah, there you go.
That's it.
Well, Kevin, it's been great. As always, I appreciate your time and the effort that you're putting into this. And so we're gonna go ahead and conclude here. Certainly, we want to thank each of you who have spent the time to listen to this discussion. We pray that it has been useful. So until we do this again, may the Lord bless you.